All right, next we're going to talk about equations. Okay, so equations in this course, because of course we can go more abstractly than this, but in this course, equations are going to be relationships between x and y variables. Okay, we're actually going to have a couple of rules. There's actually a third rule we're going to learn later in the course, but for now we're just going to deal with two rules. Okay, first rule: you can never divide by 0. This is like a golden rule of mathematics. You can never divide by 0. There's nothing around it. If you try dividing by 0, you get nonsense out. Okay? And you can also not take the square root of a negative number. That one's a little bit less unbreakable. We could actually break it, but we're not going to in this class. Okay? So let's start by just taking an example. Okay, so an example problem we might have is 4, negative 5 on the graph of x squared plus y squared equals 64. Okay, so what we might do then is we would say, all right, well, let's take x squared plus y squared equals 64. We're going to plug in x equals 4, y equals negative 5. So 4 squared plus negative 5 squared equals 16 plus 25, which is 41, which is not equal to 64. So the answer is a no. 4, negative 5 is not on the graph of x squared plus y squared equals 64. Okay. All right. Another example is we might actually be asked to graph something. We're going to graph something like this later, which is a circle. You might know that already, but we're going to graph something a little differently. Let's graph y equals square root of x plus 8. Okay, so an easy way to graph these is to start by making XY charts. Okay, so we're going to graph this by plotting some points. So let's start. Let's say x is 0, x is 1, x is 4, x is 9. Now, I chose these values because I can take the square root of these numbers. Okay, so, for example, the square root of 0 is 0. So if I plug 0 in for x, I'm going to get 8 back. The square root of 1 is 1. So if I plug 1 in for x, I'm going to get 9 back. Square root of 4 is 2. If I plug 4 in for x, I'm going to get 10 back. And the square root of 9 is 3. So if I plug 9 in for x, I'm going to get 11 back. And now I can plot this on a Cartesian coordinate system. Okay, so if x is 0, if x is 0, one, two, three, four, five, six, 7, 8. X is 0, y is 8. If x is 1, y is 9. Go to 4, y is 10. Out there at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, y is going to be 11. So I end up getting a plot that looks like so. Okay, that's y equals the square root of x plus 8. Okay, let's plot another one. Let's plot y equals square root of 4 minus x squared by plotting points. Okay, now, again, I'm going to make an XY chart. Should also get myself ready to make a Okay, now I'm going to pick x values that make sense here. Remember, I am not allowed to take the square root of a negative number. Okay, let's look back up to that rule. I am not allowed to take the square root of a negative number. Okay, so that means that I have to pick x values to avoid that negative number. I did that here as well. Okay, I did that here as well. I didn't pick negative 4 or anything. Okay, so let's start. Well, a nice value for x that I could start with is negative 2. Okay, if I plug negative 2 in for x, negative 2 squared is 4. 4 minus 4 is 0. So I'll get the square root of 0 is 0. Negative 1. If I plug that in, I get the square root of 3, which is approximately 1.86. That'll help us when we're graphing. If I plug x equals 0, I'm going to get the square root of 4, which is exactly equal to 2. If I plug 1 in for x, I'm going to get the square root of 3 again. And then if I plug 2 in for x, I'm going to get 0 again. So, negative 2 zeros here. Negative 1 square root of 3, let's say, is approximately there. 0 comma 2 is here. 1 comma square root of 3 is about there. And 2 comma 0 is there. Okay. Next thing we're going to learn about is intercepts. Okay. So let's say we have some equation, so some graph representing an equation. Let's even make it really crazy. Okay. So, what do we have? Well, here, this is the x-axis, and here we have the y-axis. Let me zoom in. Let's actually move this down a little bit. Okay, so we have our x-axis and we have our y-axis. Now, the x-intercepts are where the graph intercepts with the x-axis. Okay, what do all those points have in common? All those points have in common that their y value equals 0. Okay, think about the x-axis. That's also equivalent to saying y equals 0. Now, the y-axis and the y-intercepts, those are these points here. What do all those points have in common? Of course, x equals 0. So the y-intercepts are given by x equals 0. A little interesting, right? So a little bit, if you don't think about it for a second, you might get those mixed up. Okay, but once you think about them and see the drawing, okay, you can see how it works. So let's take an example. Okay, let's take x squared over 4 plus y squared over 25 equals 1. And we're going to find the x and y intercepts. Okay, so now remember, the x-intercepts are given by the equation y equals 0. So, if you have y equals 0 here, that means x squared over 4 plus 0 squared over 25 equals 1, or x squared equals 4, x equals plus or minus 2. So the x-intercepts are actually points positive 2, 0, negative 2, 0. Now, sometimes they don't ask you for the 0 in the MyLabs Plus, but I want to actually make sure I'm saying the points correctly. Okay. The y-intercepts. The y-intercepts are given by x equals 0. Okay, so now that simplifies to y squared over 25 equals 1. Y squared equals 25. Y equals plus or minus 5. Okay, so you get the points 0, positive 5, 0, negative 5. Okay? Alright, I'll see you all in the next video.